Hello, this is Kevin Annie Eagle Strong Voice, and welcome to the first program in our new series, We the Jury of Forum Without Borders. We're looking at the whole issue of how would a reasonable person respond to crimes by their own government and churches. And we're honored today to have with us Andrew Patterson, who's taken a very direct step in answering that question. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you, Kevin. Good to be here.
Yeah. Now, do you want to give a little bit of a background as to what the issue is, what you're engaged in?
Sure, certainly. The broad topic, of course, is genocide, and in particular, genocide conducted by the Corporation of Canada and its three main churches, the Catholic Church, the United Church of Canada, and the Anglican Church of Canada. And just to go back in time, about 3 years or so, when I moved up to Lake Cowichan, I joined the local community radio station and started an open mouth program and started doing a number of shows about topics that I certainly found of interest and thought some listeners might find of interest. I covered topics such as geoengineering, the chemtrails, vaccine safety, a number of topics from the banking system, some of the fraud that's been exposed in the banking system, and general topics that were controversial and hopefully thought-provoking. I had a number of people call in and guests on the show, and I was trying to look at topics from a more scientific perspective, perhaps, or at least bring some logic to the topic and see if we could really find out what was going on. And in the course of looking for people to talk to and subjects to talk about, I came across your name and some of the work that you had done, and gave you a call, and you agreed to meet with me, and we got together when the diary was first being screened. You'd produced it, and for listeners, watchers who are not familiar, the diary is a slightly fictionalized account of your own story.
Just slightly.
Just slightly, at any rate. And so what happened then, of course, is I started being introduced to the topic of Canada's so-called residential schools, and I'll say straight up, I think that's a terrible term. Calling them death camps is far more accurate from the data that I've seen. And one of the things you shared with me, apart from the documentary Unrepentant, which hopefully everyone is familiar with and has watched, and if you haven't, please do watch it. You can find it at hiddennolonger.com. The other thing you'll find at that website is your book, Hidden No Longer, Canada's Hidden Holocaust. Well, it's not hidden any longer. And for some people, they won't be familiar with the term Canadian Holocaust or used to hearing the terms Holocaust in other contexts. But the fact of the matter is there has been a Holocaust in Canada from a Native or Indian perspective. And I'll have to say right up, I can't be politically correct with terms with describing people, so I apologize. It's not my intention to offend anyone. But
let me just ask you a question about that, because I've always been curious how a mainstream, ordinary Canadian reacts when they see the evidence, of so many children dying, of an obvious intent by church and government to kill off these kids over a century. So what was your kind of visceral, immediate reaction when you saw this evidence online?
Well, actually, I didn't see it online first. I read the book, and the first thing it did was make me cry. It was extremely upsetting to read. It took me over a month to get through the book. It's 425 pages, but I can usually get through material more quickly. But I would get to a point where I'd go through 2 or 3 pages, and I had to stop reading. I had to process and digest that which I was reading. I knew things were bad, but I didn't realize that death rates were as high as 50% per year in some of these schools. The types of tortures that were employed, the effect it must have had on the parents to see their children taken away, and in most cases never to be seen again. This is a destruction of people, a destruction of culture, and I'm going to cut straight to it. The purpose of genocide, as far as I can determine, is theft. Theft of land, theft of resources, theft of culture, theft of people.
And it doesn't stop.
And it doesn't stop. And people have asked me, well, is the genocide ongoing? Well, I think the simple answer to that, if the purpose of genocide is theft, if the stolen goods haven't been returned, then I would have to argue that, yes, the genocide is ongoing. Never mind the disproportionate number of Indians in Canadian prisons.
Well, yeah, and I remember a really brilliant phrase you use with friends and others who are not aware of this stuff yet is they will often say, well, we didn't cause these crimes.
Sure.
But you say, no, but we're living off the avails of genocide.
Yeah. We are.
That's a good
People
term.
people are continuing to benefit from the theft of land and resources. Some people are. I should point out that a lot of people are not. I'm living in Lake Cowichan, I watch the logging trucks go through all day, every day, and there's very little benefit returned to the local community. You know, obviously some people are making some money, but locally not a lot.
And to situate this, let's say, tell the listeners where you're actually living. Where are we
Sure.
in the world?
Yes, living in a town called Lake Cowichan, on Cowichan Lake, in the middle of Vancouver Island on the west coast of the landmass that some call Canada, some call Turtle Island.
So you saw the material, and then
Yes, what happened
did you
was
do?
I read it, and you told me that the book, we don't have one here to show, but it's a 425-page book, and you had given several copies to university libraries, college libraries, and so on, and they were disappearing off the shelves. They were being taken out and not returned. Big surprise. So I took it upon myself, 2.5 years ago now, to scan the book and put it up online at hiddennolonger.com. So that caused me to read it a second time, reinforcing the message. And of course, very quickly, what people have to know about the book is not only is there a great collection of eyewitness testimony, both from survivors and from people involved in the staffing of the schools, there are also a tremendous number of government documents in there which verify what's being said, including Dr. Peter Bryce, who was publishing information about these crimes over 100 years ago.
Now, I should just say for the people who will be watching this on YouTube, we will be putting up samples of these documents as
and
we're
links.
speaking.
Yeah, we'll have links
yeah.
And so on. So what happened? That went up, and I looked at it in some more detail, and I realized that I had a moral and a legal obligation to do something about this. Because of my background, I am familiar with the Nuremberg Principles, of which there are 7. Very briefly, the Nuremberg Principles are what came out of the Nuremberg tribunals, which were held in 1948 to 1950 in Nuremberg, where Nazi war criminals were tried, and in some cases convicted, and in many cases either hung or imprisoned for life. And as a result of the crimes committed by the Nazis during World War II, the Nuremberg Principles were developed with an attitude of this will never happen again. In fact, as far as I can tell, when we're talking about the brave Canadian men and women who gave their lives and bodies in World War II, if there's one document that they fought to see produced, it would be the Nuremberg Principles, the principles that make it clear that we as individuals do have moral obligations to not follow illegal and immoral orders.
Exactly.
We each have an obligation. And I would say to any Canadian, to any human being, look at the Nuremberg Principles. If you're not familiar with them, they should be up on every wall in every school, as far as I'm concerned.
Now, this was passed at the United Nations, I think, in 1950 or something.
I believe it was adopted by the United Nations in 1950. So it is the basis of international law, the basis of the idea of crimes against peace, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. Now, the Nuremberg Principles have been codified in a more recent document known as the Rome Statute, which is the United Nations foundation of the ICC, the International Criminal Court. And again, easy to find online. Just type in the Rome Statute into your favorite search engine and you'll find it. Take a look at Article 25, Section 3, subsection C, where again it makes it absolutely clear that as individuals we can be held individually liable if we aid and abet ongoing crimes or criminal organizations. So knowing about this moral and lawful and legal obligation under international law, I decided what I needed to do was find out if the Canadian government were aware and of the genocide that they were committing and were going to continue to support it. So I wrote a notice to the then Minister of National Revenue, Keith Ashfield. And then I had really 3 sections. And this was a notarized notice. I took it to my notary and had it verified that it was my signature and sent it registered mail. And in it, the first part, I said to the minister, look, I've become aware of information, of evidence of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes committed by Canada, its churches, and or agents. So here I'm just putting it out. Look, I've come into this body of knowledge, this evidence. The next thing was I wanted to limit my own liability and saying, look, you've asked me to file returns. I just need your personal assurance that any funds that I remit to you will not be used by the government of Canada nor its agents to commit genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, crimes against peace.
Or to conceal those, and that's an important point because
Exactly.
What was the date of that first letter you sent?
This notice is mid-July 2010.
Now, this was after the announcement of this so-called Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Right.
And I remember us talking about that because clearly the TRC's mandate said that it didn't have the power to investigate these crimes. In fact, it had the power to even silence people.
I would say the TRC mandate is further evidence of ongoing genocide in Canada.
Okay, so it was that as well that prompted you to
Yes,
write the letter
absolutely. Yes.
the government's
Yes.
whitewash, in
Yes.
other words. Yeah.
Yes, and I noticed they called it exactly the same thing as the Commission in South Africa. But if you look at the mandate of the South African TRC and compare it with Canada's, they're completely different. They may have the same name, but because the mandate is so much different, whereas the TRC in South Africa had the ability to lay criminal charges.
Absolutely, and another big difference is that in South Africa they didn't grant
No, there was no immunity
Immunity
from
at all.
prosecution.
but whereas in Canada, right at the very beginning, they said no one will be prosecuted for these things.
Yeah.
So naturally, the church has signed on, right?
Well, this is the thing. No one, if people saying is the genocide ongoing, well, no one has been even charged with any crime in Canada, let alone convicted. No evidence. There's no indication that there's any move afoot to do anything like that.
Not a single person has ever been tried or brought to trial for the death of a child in a residential school, still to this day.
Yeah, even though upwards of 50,000
Yeah.
were murdered.
Okay, now you wrote the letter.
Right.
Do you want to continue talking about
Sure.
the
So
letter?
I sent the notice and I gave a time limit. Because you get talking about the letter, the second part was, look, I just want to make sure that I'm not going to be liable. I'm aware of my lawful and moral and legal obligations under international law. So I looked for the minister's personal assurance that the crimes and the crime and cover-up would not continue. And then saying, and if you can't give me your assurance, then this is your agreement that you are doing these things.
Right.
That we now have a contract. So from my perspective, I now have, because Ashfield did write back, he would not give me his personal assurance, rather saying that the purpose of my notice was unclear. And again, I'll make the notice available so people can read for themselves and decide as to its clarity.
He said it was unclear.
Yes, the meaning was unclear, but went on to assure me that I had to do as I was told. And at this point, to be really clear, that as a previous Canadian citizen, I always filed and played straight according to the rules. The one time I was audited, there was a zero change.
But you're saying to the government, I need your reassurance
Yes,
that I'm not going to be breaking the law by paying you taxes.
that's right.
That's essentially the issue.
That's right. I just want to make sure that I'm not going to be held liable. Now that I'm aware of this evidence, I just want to make sure I'm not going to be held liable. Will you take the liability?
So you're trying to follow the law,
Yes.
and you're asking the government if they'll do the same.
That's right.
So their answer was, initially,
That they don't understand what I'm talking about.
okay, so then what did you do?
I carried on to whenever a CRA agent would contact me, first thing I would do is seek their personal assurance that any funds remitted to them wouldn't be used to commit crimes.
CRA, by the way, is Canadian Revenue Agency.
Canada Revenue
Canada
Agency,
Revenue.
yes, equivalent to IRS in the United States or Inland Revenue in Great Britain, I
Okay.
suppose.
So,
They're the private collection company for the private corporation of Canada.
so you said to them that, say that again, what you said to CRA.
Again, all I'm looking for is your personal assurance that any funds that I remit to you will not be used to commit crimes. In a word,
Okay. And what did they say?
no one will give me their assurance. To date, not one individual will give me any verbal reassurance, let alone written.
Okay. But what have they done?
What they have done instead is seized my company bank account. They have issued third-party collection notices to my customers so that customers are told that they have to pay CRA instead of paying me.
Are they allowed to do that? To intervene between?
It's my understanding that they're third-party interlopers, and that these third-party collection notices have been ruled against by the Supreme Court of Canada.
Well, that's what I thought. A third party is not allowed to intervene in
No.
the contractual relationship
No,
between parties.
and again, you know, the Canadian Revenue Agency, rather than dealing with me directly and addressing these issues in writing, as I am, there's been a lot of correspondence. They simply will not address it. All they can say is, we don't see what this has to do with the Income Tax Act.
But they're threatening your customers. Now, what kind of business do you operate, by the way?
We have my wife and I have a web design and hosting business. We don't do any hosting. We've been doing design, but essentially, they're going after us again. Again, rather than deal with us directly on this and write to us and address the concerns, no, it's just a case of, we don't know what you're talking about, you have to pay your taxes. And I've asked them, are you counseling me to ignore the Rome Statute? Which, by the way, in Canada, when you counsel someone to commit an offense, I believe you can get a jail sentence of up to 12 years.
So the government is actually breaking the law, international law, by doing what they're doing. Yes.
In my view. And there are scholars such as Professor Francis Boyle at the University of Illinois who apparently agree with me. And this is the point, that I am not breaking any law here. This isn't a case of civil disobedience. This is a case of, I believe, I'm standing on the law, I've shown the law, I've quoted the relevant international and Canadian statutes, and again, asking the Canadian Revenue Agency and the Canadian government to deal with me at the level of the law. But instead, they won't address it. They won't discuss any of that with me. All they will do instead is just, they're turning up like the mafia, saying, you owe money, you owe money, you owe money, and taking any and every means to try and get it out.
They're also disparaging you in the eyes of your customers.
They're absolutely trying to. They're trying to embarrass us. They've done things like phone my landlord, and again, trying to embarrass us with the line that, well, if you don't pay your taxes, you're not paying for your share of the roads and schools. And
what have they said to your landlord?
Oh, just how's he paying you, and so on. And,
did your landlord say anything?
I only said, well, he pays on time. That's all I care about.
Yeah.
But well, I mean, I will have to say that, because I imagine the tax collector around the world has always been vilified, but in general, Canadians don't seem to have a lot of time for the Canada Revenue Agency.
Now, so where do things stand now? They threaten your customers. You're under, obviously, a lot of economic pressure from them. Has your livelihood been affected by this?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this has cost us thousands of dollars in terms of lost customers, lost revenue, inability to bill customers for work that we do, because if we do, the people that we're billing have to pay Canada Revenue Agency rather than us.
You have a family to support.
Yeah, exactly. And again, rather than deal with us directly, lawfully, manfully, I would add, all they can do is run around and try and disparage us and try and make us feel that we should be embarrassed because we're not paying our taxes. And I want to be very clear as well, the amount of money that we're talking about is minimal. We're talking $3,000 or $4,000 here.
So why do you think they're going after you like this?
I can only think that, and again, this is speculation on my part, that if they actually acknowledge the genocide and that funding them is funding genocide, then that would be the reason every other Canadian is looking to not pay their taxes. Now, I want to be clear, this isn't about not paying my taxes. I believe in doing the right thing and pulling my weight in all of this. This is not about that. This is about saying, look, there's serious crimes being committed and they have to stop. And people say, oh, Canada does this and it's great and it does that. It's like talking about the uncle, who provides well at Christmas and
then beats his kids.
Yeah, exactly, or murders his wife. It doesn't matter how good a man he is. If he murders his wife, he stands trial for murder, and if convicted, he goes to jail. That's the way we work. It doesn't matter how good you were in every other aspect of your life.
The basic issue is we are not obligated and are supposed to not fund crimes, and you're being asked to.
I'm more than asked to. I'm being told that if I don't, that they will starve me out.
Okay. So they're asking you to collude in a crime.
Yes.
Right.
In fact, they're insisting. So is that not another crime?
So where do things go now? What do you want to
Well,
do?
what I would like to do is find a court of competent jurisdiction. And I would point out that any Crown court is not a court of competent jurisdiction because the Crown is implicated in these crimes. And so I'm looking at the International Common Law Court of Justice and looking for injunctive relief. to issue an injunction against Canada Revenue Agency, asking them to deal with the issue directly or leave us alone and leave our customers alone so we can just get on with living. And deal with me directly on the issue and stop trying to be a sneaky bee.
Well, this is the kind of thing that is perfect for our International Common Law Court of Justice because it's a case of somebody actually trying to follow international law concerning genocide in Canada, which is our first case that's been posted up online.
Well, this is the case. This is the thing. I'm not breaking any laws. I'm standing on the law. I'm quoting the law. I'm not a rebel. I'm not a dissenter. Per se, I am.
You're a small C conservative businessman.
A small C conservative businessman who believes that people should be held accountable for their actions. That's
exactly.
And if society won't back me on that, then we have to look at the society and go, how is it so sick that people won't stand up and speak up and defend children who are being raped and murdered?
Right. Let's be clear about that too. We're not talking about crimes that ended in 1989 or whenever all the residential schools closed. These are ongoing crimes against humanity.
Yeah. Look, one thing that we can be clear of here in British Columbia is that the residential schools, and I think it's true across North America, simply morphed into child protective services,
foster care.
They're and this is spoken to by the fact that the United Nations back in 1999, looking at the top cities for child trafficking. Number one, not surprising, was Bangkok in Thailand. Number two was Rotterdam in Europe. And number three is Vancouver.
Yeah.
The Indian children going out and the Asian children coming in. And so Vancouver is a huge hub for the child flesh market.
And there have been judges in the BC Supreme Court named by insiders as have been part of that trafficking.
Yes. Yeah. Well, this is what we find very sadly, and it seems to be a universal, that the pedophilia is most rampant as we move up into the elite circles. What's going on in England with Jimmy Savile, who is now dead, is just further evidence of that.
Right.
That's perhaps a different topic, but just the same.
Well, it's all connected because we're talking about how to pull the plug on these crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And the first obligation is for citizens to be aware, first of all, and then based on the awareness, as you experienced, not funding, not being an accessory to a crime.
One of the things we hear is, taking the law into our own hands. Well, the law has always been in our hands, except that when it's been usurped by tyrants. And this is the whole point, is that it's not up to the police to enforce the law. It's up to all of us to enforce it. The police are the technicians who make sure that it's done properly and correctly. And I want to be very clear that I am a huge proponent of due process, that people are entitled to due process. They're entitled to a fair trial if charged. And I also do not support the death penalty in any way. I believe that someone is convicted of a serious crime like this, that a jail term in humane conditions is in fact the way to go. Give people a chance to reflect upon what they've done. And yes, so what am I looking for? I'm looking for injunctive relief against the Canada Revenue Agency, and perhaps for people to take a look at their obligations under international law, as well as their own morality. And because after all, it really is up to us to insist on the rules being followed. If we don't insist that the rules are followed, we see what happens. The rules get broken.
Right. Now,
impunity.
How far you're willing to go on this?
Well, I guess that remains to be seen. My moral convictions are such that I don't see what alternative we have except to continue to say that we cannot support crime.
Exactly.
How far that goes, I really can't say. I would like to think that there are enough good people at Canada Revenue Agency and working within the Government of Canada that they will understand what this is about, that they will do their own investigations, become aware of the heinous crimes that have been committed and continue to be committed, cover up of these crimes. Because a lot of people, here's another one that we often hear is, oh, isn't this just history? It's historical. Well, if this is a historical topic, then the documents held by the churches and governments under lock and key, the sealed documents, should be made public. The fact that these documents are not public speaks to the fact that if these documents come out, it's going to create trouble for these institutions and people in these institutions. So here's what I would say. If this matter is not historical to them, why should it be historical to us?
Mm-hmm. And they're clearly covering it up by not releasing these documents.
That's the only conclusion we can come to. What other motive would they have for retaining them?
And by not investigating these mass grave sites that we've identified all over Canada near the former residential schools.
Well, that's another point to the Canadian attitude, if you will, is a couple of years ago after the Olympics, the Winter Olympics at Whistler, a number of sled dogs were killed because of economic reasons, we're told.
And there was an outcry.
And there was a hue and outcry. It was global. How could this happen? And $250,000 was committed to digging in this mass grave of dogs. 10 dogs were unearthed. That's $25,000 per dog. Canadians will be happy to spend $25,000 to dig up a dog to prove a crime that was already admitted to, by the way. And yet we've got thousands and thousands of dead children and babies buried across Canada. And the attitude towards digging these graves, people run in the other direction. Oh, no, can't do that. That's sacred ground. Or the other extreme, who cares? It's just a bunch of dead idiots.
Right. Or you're making it up and there's no proof, which is ridiculous now because the government's even admitted now that the death rate was that huge. So the question is, where did 50,000 bodies go? Andrew, just in closing, is there a way that if people can help you or want to be involved and do what you're doing, they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can contact me. Again, it's not my place to tell anyone else what to do or how to act. It's up to each of us to connect with our own conscience and sense of ethics and morality. In terms of helping me, quite frankly, we're skint as a result of the action we're taking, and struggling financially. If anyone feels like helping me, that would be most welcome.
How do they get a hold of you?
I would say at this stage probably the best way is through you at the ITCCS. If they can email you directly.
All right,
contact me.
hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com. And let me just say, since you mentioned ITCCS, it seems on the basis of learning this thing, it's one of the things that prompted you to get involved in our tribunal.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing is I was brought up like any other white Canadian in terms of given a history in school that made everything look, if not perfect, at least okay, that there were good intentions of assimilation and, taming the wild savage, those sorts of myths. So I get it when most Canadians are not aware. I will say this, what is interesting is as I've exposed people to this information, I would have to say by and large most people are not motivated to take any action, and I've looked at that, and I can only think either A, they're benefiting from the system the way it is, and there's nothing in it for them to see a change, or B, just a case of simple racism. They're just Indians, who cares? And I don't mean to be offensive saying that, but that is the attitude I've run into repeatedly. Again, people are going to have to look at their own conscience and decide what to do. But that said, what it comes back to, we're standing on the law here. The law says we have a moral, ethical, and legal obligation, lawful obligation, to not support these crimes.
The crimes of the Canadian government, the Crown of England, the Vatican, the churches of Canada, Protestant, Catholic. Andrew, thank you, and we'll follow this with more updates about Andrew's struggle and the responses of the government and how others can be involved in this. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.